The Subcommittee on Crime, Terrorism, and Homeland Security will come to order. I'd first like to welcome our new ranking member, Judge Gohmert, who is taking over from my Virginia colleague, Randy Forbes. We've worked together on a number of things, and we look forward to working with you on this subcommittee. I'd like to welcome everyone to the hearing regarding state-run juvenile correction facilities known as boot camps. Boot camps are modeled after military training camps and are considered as an alternative to conventional juvenile institutions, instilling discipline, structure, and education in a manner that youths are not receiving it in conventional school in their home environment. Although the boot camp concept has its advocate, the reality is that we've had widespread reports of abuse by camp employees and reports of several fatalities at camps around the country. The system is simply not performing as intended, and children are in many of these camps in danger. One of the most recent high-profile deaths is that of Martin Lee Anderson, who died in a Florida boot camp on January 6, 2006. His case garnered significant public attention because there was a videotape of guards beating him because they believed that he was faking illness to get out of exercise. After beating him, the guards forced him to inhale ammonia smelling salts. When he lost consciousness, the guards realized that he was seriously ill, but by the time medical help had arrived, it was too late to save his life. The guards and a nurse were charged with manslaughter and gross neglect, but in October 2007, all were acquitted of all charges. However, the case was the impetus to shut down some of the juvenile boot camp facilities. According to Professor Doris McKenzie from the University of Maryland Department of Criminology, who is with us today, poor training, inadequate oversight, and misguided policies have caused the abusive environments that many boot camps have become. 20 states still operate boot camps despite the ongoing problems with them. The most recent death occurred in Colorado in May of this year. A 15-year-old boy named Caleb Jensen died from an untreated staph infection while incarcerated at Alternative Youth Adventures, AYA, in Colorado. He contacted an infection, realized he was ill, and told facility employees over a period of several days that he was not well, but his claims were ignored, and by the time a counselor sat down to talk to him, Caleb slumped over and died from the very illness he had been complaining about for those days. Although Colorado revoked AYA's license to operate, no charges have been filed against any of the employees. Another example of boot camp deaths include 14-year-old Gina Score, who collapsed during a forced run at a South Dakota boot camp. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 226 pounds. Obviously unfit for rigorous exercise, yet the guards forced her to run 2.7 miles in 77-degree heat with 81% humidity. She passed out. Guards believed that she too was faking it, and they left her on the ground for 3 hours until she died of heat stroke, her body temperature having reached 108 degrees. Employees were charged with child abuse but were acquitted. Then there was Travis Parker, 13 years old, who was incarcerated in a Georgia boot camp when he was killed by guards who held him to the ground for more than an hour while he pleaded for his asthma inhaler. They didn't give it to him because he had a habit of they said he had a habit of asking for an inhaler, quote, whenever he was restrained. 6 camp employees were indicted for felony murder, child cruelty, and involuntary manslaughter, but the district attorney dropped all of the charges after a judge ruled in favor of the defendants in a pretrial motion. One thing in common to Martin Lee Anderson, Gina Score, Travis Parker, and Caleb Jensen is that none of the responsible guards were ever held criminally liable for the children's death. This hearing will focus on whether states have begun to take adequate steps to ensure the protection of the civil rights of those who are committed to state-run boot camps, and whether the boot camp concept has merit from a criminal justice policy perspective. I'd now like to recognize our distinguished colleague, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Congressman Louis Gohmert from the 1st Congressional District of Texas.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. I am looking forward to working with Chairman Scott, other members of the subcommittee on the important issues of this subcommittee's jurisdiction. I also want to express my admiration for my colleague, former ranking member Randy Forbes, of Virginia, who served this last year as the ranking member of the subcommittee. It's my hope, Mr. Chairman, that you and I can maintain as effective a relationship as you as ranking member Fords did during the preceding year. Today's hearing on state-run juvenile facilities does concern me to some extent with regard to the scarce use of oversight resources that we have. I am tremendously personally sympathetic for anyone who has suffered, as has been laid out so articulately by our chairman. And we're all aware of the tragic death of a juvenile in Panama City and the acquittal of the boot camp guards. That matter is now under federal investigation, it sounds like appropriately, and we should do nothing to interfere with that ongoing investigation. But there's not a single correctional boot camp maintained by the federal government. The prosecution and confinement of juveniles is almost exclusively a state issue. Approximately 93% of all criminal prosecutions are conducted by state and local prosecutors. The percentage of state prosecutions of juveniles is even higher than that. According to the Bureau of Prisons, there are only 178 juveniles in the entire federal prison system. Because there are so few juveniles in the system, the Bureau of Prisons does not even maintain a facility for juveniles and instead contracts with state, local, and private entities for the confinement of juvenile offenders in the federal system. Prison boot camp programs started in the 1980s and were designed for young male offenders originally convicted of nonviolent offenses. As the name suggests, boot camp programs are modeled after military boot camp training and involve a daily regimen, usually of physical training, work assignments, education, and vocational training. Over half of the states develop boot camp programs in the hopes of lowering the rates of recidivism among released offenders and reducing costs of housing offenders in traditional juvenile detention facilities and reducing crowding in those detention facilities. By most measures, the boot camp experiment seems to have met with mixed success in meeting those three goals. In recent years, some states have made the determination that the benefits are outweighed by the costs or problems with their boot camp programs. In other states, they've determined they're better off keeping their boot camp programs. In either case, I believe and I hope that it will ultimately be agreed that those decisions should be made without undue influence from those of us in the federal government. Having been on the juvenile board of our county in Texas, where I served as a district judge and later a chief justice, we looked at the proposition of having a day boot camp. We looked at other boot camps, talked to a lot of people that were involved in boot camps. We liked the idea of a day boot camp better than a residential boot camp, and ultimately went with that and found there were many benefits from that. But as I think understand from our witnesses and some of the indications, if all you do is a military-style regimen of physical activity, you're missing the entire boat. It has to be mixed with education and other assistance, vocational training, things like that in order to help juveniles reduce recidivism. And additionally, I think everyone would agree, if you're going to have a program like that, it does require adequate accountability and monitoring, and sometimes these programs have not had that. In any event, I look forward to hearing the testimony of the witnesses, and I will yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the chair of the full Judiciary Committee, Mr. Conyers, for a statement.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, and I welcome Judge Gomert to the subcommittee as the new ranking member. And this is a very active committee. And this subject matter is one that leads me to briefly say the following. I hope this hearing and any others that may follow it lead to a re-examination of the concept and purpose of juvenile boot camps. It's been observed already that these facilities don't seem to be any more successful than other types of juvenile justice programs, and do little more or sometimes less to prevent recidivism. It's also noted that education and drug rehabilitation programs play a major role in helping young people rehabilitate themselves. The second thing on my mind as we start these hearings is that we need to ensure that it is a crime for a child to be killed while being detained in a boot camp. We must